The lights in the studio blazed white as Chef Antoine barked orders like a general at war. He leaned forward, knife glinting in hand, and said, "This is what real cuisine looks like." At the edge of the set stood Lila, a young black woman with trembling fingers and a soul full of flavor. She held out a handwritten recipe, her grandmother's gumbo, slow-cooked, rich with history. Antoine snatched the paper, glanced at it, scoffed, then dropped it to the floor. Too rustic. Too southern. The cameras didn't catch it, but the entire room felt her silence. An ancestral echo silenced yet again. No one stood up for her. No one said a word. As Antoine turned back to his polished dish, Lila stared down at her paper now trampled beneath his boot. Her breath caught, not from humiliation, but ignition. Something inside her cracked, then surged. In that moment, the world witnessed the rejection, but missed the spark. The spark that would burn down the entire food world. Long after the cameras shut down, the kitchen smelled of triumph, but not hers. Lila stepped outside into the cool dusk air, the sky brushed with purples and gray. Her fingers gripped the recipe still, now creased and smeared with kitchen grime. "It's just food," someone had once told her. But to Lila, it was survival, memory, a language spoken across generations. Her grandmother's voice echoed softly in her head. "They'll never taste what you carry unless you serve it your way." She didn't cry. Not tonight. She walked alone past a row of food trucks and street vendors down the block, places where seasoning spoke louder than pedigree. Each scent tugged her memory. Her stride grew more certain with every step. She didn't know it yet, but she just left behind a kingdom that never wanted her, and was about to build her own. Inside a cramped apartment kitchen, Lila lit the stove. The pilot flame caught with a hiss, echoing like a heartbeat. She set out a pot, old, blackened at the base from decades of soul food. "One time of the time creative work, pound and weigh." As she sliced okra, she whispered the words her grandma taught her, like prayers tied to motion. Every ingredient she added wasn't just for taste, but truth. Her walls were bare, her fridge nearly empty, but this meal, this gumbo, was wealth. A knock startled her. Her roommate, Dee, leaned in. "Girl, that's smelling like my childhood." Lila smiled faintly, but didn't stop stirring. Dee asked what happened at the show, but Lila only said, "He threw it away." Then added, "I'm gonna cook it anyway." Steam rose like spirits from the pot, wrapping Lila in quiet power. She wasn't looking for validation anymore. She was building a world where her food was the authority. The next day, Lila wandered into a local farmer's market. The sun was harsh, but her smile softened it. She spoke with vendors, picked tomatoes by feel, not just sight. People recognized her. "Hey, you're the girl from that cooking show, right?" someone asked. She nodded, but didn't stop walking. Every booth offered her something fresh, but she wasn't shopping for ingredients. She was hunting for belonging. At one stall, a Creole grandmother selling homemade spice blends looked her dead in the eye and said, "You look like you've got a pot worth stirring." Lila laughed softly. She bought 2 bags of her smoked cayenne and walked away lighter. No fame. No fanfare. Just fire and focus. Later that week, tucked into the corner of a neighborhood fair, Lila set up a borrowed table. Just one pot. One ladle. No signage. No marketing. Just gumbo. The first customer was hesitant. "What is it?" She answered, "It's home." He tried it, and his eyes widened. Within the hour, her line tripled. Someone pulled out a phone. Another started recording. She didn't notice. All she saw were empty bowls returned with quiet nods. This was her stage now. Not a shiny kitchen set. Not a condescending judge. Just a street corner, and a bubbling pot passed down from a woman who never needed permission to feed the world. Before she could cook, Lila watched. As a child, she sat cross-legged in her grandma's kitchen, soot from the stovetop painting the walls like stories untold. The air was always thick with the perfume of smoked meat, herbs, and something intangible, soul. Her grandmother, Mama Odette, stirred gumbo like she was conjuring history. "This ain't just food," Mama Odette would say, "it's resistance in a bowl." Young Lila asked, "Against what?" And Mama would answer, "Against being forgotten." Lila learned that flavors could outlive memory. That okra could thicken not just stew, but resolve. These weren't just meals, they were declarations. In that cramped house in the Ninth Ward, Lila didn't just inherit recipes. She inherited purpose. And though she didn't know it then, every seasoning choice, every pinch of salt, would one day serve as armor in a world not built to taste her truth. Years later, when the floodwaters came, Lila lost more than a home. Mama Odette's house, her notebooks, even the old pot, all swallowed by Katrina's rage. They evacuated late. Lila remembered clinging to her recipe journal in a plastic bag, her hands raw from gripping it tight through the chaos. Shelter food tasted like metal and numbness. Mama Odette never made it back. But in the silence that followed, Lila began rewriting what she could remember. Not just dishes, but voice, cadence, scent. When she cooked in college dorms later, classmates called it comfort food. But to her, it was ritual, resurrection. Each dish became a stitched piece of her broken lineage. She didn't cook to impress. She cooked to remember. And in remembering, she began to rebuild what was taken, one spoonful at a time. Lila's first job in a kitchen wasn't glamorous. She scrubbed dishes in the back of a Cajun fusion spot that barely passed health inspections. But she studied every plate that left the pass, memorizing how chefs built flavors, how they plated with arrogance but sometimes forgot soul. She began sneaking in her own spice blends during staff meals, low-key testing what worked. One day, the head chef caught her. He tasted her version of red beans and rice, and muttered, "Too bold." But the staff devoured it. From then on, she was the secret weapon, never praised, but always needed. Late at night, she'd practice her own dishes, whispering Mama Odette's lessons like incantations. She didn't have a degree. She didn't have a title. But she had taste, and it was dangerous enough to be feared. At night, Lila worked food trucks. Not for money, but for stories. Every vendor had a tale, a spice trick, a family secret. She traded labor for lessons, grilling kebabs in exchange for jerk chicken secrets, folding dumplings for kimchi recipes. She became fluent in food dialects from across the diaspora. One vendor, a Nigerian auntie with a booming laugh, told her, "Your gumbo tastes like Lagos met Louisiana." Lila took that as the highest compliment. These streets became her classroom. No Michelin stars here. Just sweat, fire, and truth. And in those asphalt kitchens, she learned something the culinary world never taught her. The best meals weren't judged, they were shared. Eventually, someone offered her a test. A friend of a friend who ran a catering company gave her a one-night shot. High-end event. Fancy crowd. She cooked what she knew. Gumbo, greens, sweet heat, cornbread. Halfway through the night, the host asked, "Who's the chef?" The staff froze. Lila stepped forward. The host blinked. "You made this?" She nodded. He nodded back, slow. "It's the only thing they're coming back for." That night, something shifted. Not because she was validated, but because she saw their surprise. Her excellence was unexpected. And that meant it was powerful. She wasn't just cooking anymore. She was disrupting. Lila's pop-up dinners began in borrowed backyards and church kitchens. RSVP only, word of mouth. She called it the revival table. No menus, no themes, just ancestral magic in a bowl. What started with 10 guests grew to 50, then 100. The buzz traveled fast. Bloggers raved about underground soul cuisine. People came dressed for TikTok, but left changed. Still, behind the scenes, Lila worked non-stop, shopping at 5 a.m., prepping alone, burning fingers, missing meals. Success looked good from the outside, but inside she wrestled with imposter syndrome, exhaustion, and a gnawing fear. What if this world only liked her food when it was exotic, not respect? After one dinner, she collapsed into a chair, apron soaked in broth, and whispered, "I'm building a temple and bleeding for every brick." And still, she showed up the next night. One night, a well-known local food critic attended her dinner. Lila hadn't invited him. He came with a guest. He didn't speak much, just chewed slowly, scribbled notes, and left before dessert. The next morning, his review dropped. It praised the food but called it unrefined and lacking culinary discipline. He described Lila as passionate but amateur. Her inbox flooded, some defending her, others echoing his words. It hit her harder than she expected. Dee found her standing still in the kitchen, staring at boiling rice like it was a riddle. "You gonna let some stranger tell you how to taste your own story?" Dee asked. Lila didn't answer. But later, she pulled out Mama Odette's gumbo recipe and rewrote it from memory, again. Each word she wrote down was a refusal, a quiet rebellion. The next pop-up sold out in minutes. Her food wasn't the only thing under fire. Social media trolls crawled out, questioning her authenticity. Some accused her of elevating black food for white approval. Others mocked her lack of culinary school credentials. One post went viral. "She's just remixing struggle food with tablecloth." Lila read every word. It all stung, because part of it whispered her own insecurities back to her. She wanted to uplift, not water down. She wanted to be seen, not filtered. She called her aunt that night, her voice cracking. "What if I'm making it worse?" Her aunt replied, "You're not watering it down. You're showing them it's always been deep." That night, Lila changed her bio from pop-up chef to culinary reclaimer. Let them tweet. She was rewriting the dictionary now. A new opportunity came, a spot at a high-profile food festival. Shared stage. Big audience. She almost said no. The lineup was stacked with white male, classically trained chefs. But Dee pushed her. "You don't walk into their room, you change the room when you enter." Lila wore Mama Odette's scarf as a bandana that day. When her turn came, she didn't try to impress. She told the crowd, "I'm not a chef who studied French technique. I'm a woman who studied survival." She served smoked turkey gumbo with cornbread dumplings. The crowd went still after the first bite. Then applause broke like thunder. One of the chefs who had ignored her earlier walked over and asked quietly, "How'd you learn to layer flavor like that?" She smiled. Inheritance. Her name was trending now. TV producers called. Magazine shoots followed. Everyone wanted to highlight the new voice of soul food. But Lila knew the game. She was careful with what she said, what she signed. One producer pitched a reality show. "We'll call it Grits and Grit." Lila hung up. She didn't want branding. She wanted a blueprint, something others could build on. She looked at an empty storefront one day, cracked windows, rusted signage, but she saw a kitchen. A sanctuary. A revolution in waiting. She placed her hand on the glass and whispered, "I want to feed them without apology." That night, she began sketching menus, names, layouts. She wasn't chasing fame anymore. She was chasing legacy. The grand opening of Revival was unlike anything the neighborhood had seen. No ribbon cutting, no influencer soft launch, just Lila opening the doors and lighting the first stove. People lined the block. Inside, jazz hummed low under the clatter of spoons. Lila moved like water, focused, fluid. But amid the joy, her phone buzzed with a message from Dee. "You need to see this." Attached was a video clip from a primetime cooking show. Chef Antoine, yes, that Antoine, smiling beside a new rustic soul menu. In his hand, a bowl of gumbo. Her gumbo, down to the garnish. He said, "We were inspired by traditions passed down in the South." No credit, no mention, me. Just repackaged culture served with a grin. Lila watched the screen, breath slow and steady. The theft wasn't loud. It was surgical. And somehow, that made it worse. The clip spread like wildfire. Side-by-side comparisons flooded the internet. Her gumbo versus Antoine's. Foodies, critics, and even celebrities chimed in. Some called it inspiration. Others saw theft. But Lila didn't post. Didn't explain. Instead, she opened her notebook and flipped to the original recipe, Mama Odette's Gumbo, version 14 Thai. A note scribbled at the bottom read, "What they steal you multiply." That night, she ran a new special called Uncredited. The dish, gumbo, but layered deeper, fire-roasted, garnished with burnt citrus and defiance spice. She told no one it was a response. But the line grew longer. And the people who tasted it? They knew. This wasn't just a meal. It was resistance served hot. A journalist reached out. She wanted to interview Lila for a story titled Theft on a Plate. It promised exposure, outrage, justice. But Lila paused. What if speaking up made her the headline and not the work? What if the narrative became a fight, not a foundation? She sat in the empty restaurant after closing, staring at her grandmother's spoon framed on the wall. Dee sat across from her. "You don't have to prove anything," Dee said softly. "You already won." But Lila knew the real victory wasn't silence. It was scale. "He took a recipe," Lila whispered. "I'm building an empire." She turned down the interview. Instead, she started working on expansion plans. New locations. Training kitchens. Scholarships. If they stole the spark, she'd light the whole damn block on fire. But the twist didn't end there. A former sous chef from Antoine's kitchen reached out anonymously. They sent screenshots of internal emails. Meeting notes. It was worse than Lila thought. Months ago, right after her appearance on the cooking show, Antoine had assigned a team to reconstruct her gumbo. The word replicate was highlighted. One note even read, "Market it as a soulful tribute, not appropriation." Legal recourse was murky. He hadn't trademarked the recipe, and neither had she. But what mattered more was truth. She printed the emails, taped them to the inside of her dry storage door, not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. Every day she passed that door, she didn't see theft. She saw proof that her food was so powerful, someone tried to steal its soul, and still couldn't touch its heart. One night, just before closing, a quiet man entered the restaurant. Older. White. Dressed in a tailored jacket. Lila looked up and froze. It was Antoine. He didn't sit. Just stood at the host stand. "I tasted your gumbo," he said. "The new version." Lila didn't move. "It's brilliant." She nodded once, but said nothing. He shifted awkwardly. "Should have given you credit." Her silence expanded. "Finally," she said, "you didn't give me anything to credit." His eyes dropped. "I want to make things right," he added. She walked to the register, took out a to-go bowl, and ladled gumbo into it. Handed it to him. "This one's not for sale," she said. "But if you want the recipe, you'll have to apply like everyone else." Then turned her back and walked away. The door clicked shut behind him. Lila didn't watch him leave. She had more guests to feed. Word spread. Revival was no longer a local gem. It became a movement. Features in national food mags, TV spots, guest invites to international food summits. But Lila declined most of them. She wasn't chasing cameras, she was planting roots. She launched a program called The Lineage Kitchen, training young chefs from marginalized communities. No tuition. Just talent and tenacity. The walls of the kitchen were covered in stories, literally. She asked each student to write one family recipe on the wall before they graduated. The space became a living archive of voices once pushed out of fine dining. One day, a girl no older than 16 handed Lila a plate of smoky collards and said, "My mama cried when I told her I cooked this for someone who saw me." Lila swallowed the tears. This was the work. Not fame. not revenge. Legacy. Late one night, alone in her office, Lila unlocked the old chest she hadn't opened since Katrina. Inside were scraps, smudged photos, a melted spoon, water-damaged notes. At the bottom was a stained cloth napkin, folded like a secret. Unwrapping it, she found a small brooch, Mama Odette's. She pinned it to her chest, over her apron. For years she'd been building her own path, unsure if she was honoring or erasing the past. But in that quiet moment, it hit her. She was the bridge. Not the replication. The continuation. Not all legacies are about looking back. Some are about moving forward while carrying the weight gently. She placed the napkin on her desk and began sketching a new menu. It wasn't gumbo. It wasn't anything she'd inherited. It was hers. And it was time. Opening night of her new tasting experience, Root and Flame. No guests knew what to expect. The space was candlelit, each table adorned with handwritten quotes from Black culinary history. As guests arrived, they weren't given menus, they were told stories. Lila stepped forward, not from a kitchen, but from the heart. "Tonight you won't choose your dishes," she said. "They've already chosen you." Each course was based on a memory. Grief, joy, survival, celebration. The room grew still. People weren't eating. They were listening. And when the first course arrived, smoked oxtail broth with dandelion greens, you could hear a pin drop. It wasn't just about food anymore. It was about being seen. Every bite said, "We've always been here." After the last course, no one clapped. They sat in silence, digesting more than just food. And then, it came. A slow rising standing ovation. No phones. No selfies. Just respect. A guest approached Lila in tears. "I didn't know food could heal me like that." Lila nodded gently. "Neither did I," she said. That night, the world didn't just taste her cooking. They tasted her story, her people's pain, and their persistence. That ovation wasn't for technique. It was for truth. In that moment, Lila knew the old world she once begged to enter. She had left it behind. She wasn't a guest at the table anymore. She had built the table. And now, she was feeding the world on her own terms. That same night, long after guests left, Lila sat at one of the empty tables, barefoot, bowl in hand. The final dish? One she made for herself. It wasn't on the menu. Just rice, smoked shrimp, and a whisper of lemon zest. Simple. Honest. She closed her eyes and took a bite. And just like that, she was home. Mama Odette's voice echoed faintly, not as a memory but as presence. "They can copy your recipe, baby. But they can't cook it like you." Lila smiled, slow and soft. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of 100 others. She set the bowl down, stretched, and stood. Then turned off the lights, one by one, until only the glow from the kitchen remained. A flame that refused to die. 6 months after Root and Flame launched, Lila walked into the restaurant not to cook, but to learn. A new team led the kitchen now, most of them her former students. She watched from the doorway, smiling as they prepped with laughter, missteps, and a rhythm all their own. One young chef accidentally oversalted a broth. "Too much sass," she joked, and they all cracked up. Lila didn't correct them. She didn't need to. They were learning like she once did, through fire, error, and instinct. She turned and walked out, apron slung over her shoulder. The restaurant didn't need her to survive anymore. And maybe that was the point. Her legacy wasn't tied to the food, it was tied to who now cooked it. She'd planted seeds, and they were already feeding the future. Lila was invited to speak at a culinary symposium, this time as a keynote. She walked onto the stage in sneakers and a vintage denim jacket stitched with patches from every city revival had fed. No cue cards. Just her story. She talked about her grandmother, about recipes born from survival, about stolen credit, and earned respect. "I used to think I had to be perfect to be seen," she said. "But what I really needed was to be unapologetically real." The crowd, chefs, critics, students, sat frozen. Then, as she finished, a ripple of applause turned into thunder. Not because she demanded it. Because she lived it. That night, headlines didn't call her soul food chef. They called her visionary. Lila walked through her old neighborhood in the Ninth Ward, where it all began. Many lots were still empty, years after the storm. But one corner had transformed, a community garden named Odette's Patch. Children harvested collard greens beside raised beds. A mural painted across a nearby wall showed Mama Odette ladling gumbo over a skyline of rising homes. Lila crouched beside a girl planting okra and asked, "You like to cook?" The girl nodded. "My granny says gumbo makes people sit still." Lila laughed. She's right. The past wasn't gone. It had bloomed into something more. Something rooted. And this time, it wouldn't be washed away. The garden fed more than bellies. It fed memory. And Lila knew this was the future Mama Odette had stirred toward. Lila began mentoring beyond the kitchen. Outlasts. She taught workshops on food equity, cultural preservation, and storytelling through taste. Her sessions weren't about branding, they were about belonging. She stood in community centers, rec rooms, school gyms, anywhere someone wanted to listen. She handed out notebooks before knives. "Write your food before you cook it," she said. "Know where it came from. Know who paid the price so you could taste it." For many, it was the first time they'd been told their family's cooking mattered. Not as trend, but as truth. Lila watched as young voices rose, not to mimic hers, but to sing their own. That was her victory. Not echo, but evolution. One quiet morning, Lila returned to the bayou where her grandmother once fished. Mist hugged the water. Cypress trees stood like old saints. She brought no camera, no journal, just a small bowl of gumbo and a wooden spoon. She sat on the dock and ate slowly, letting the silence answer questions she'd carried for years. No awards. No press. Just peace. In the distance, a bird called. She whispered, "I made it, Mama." Not to prove anything, but to close a circle. Not every revolution is loud. Some are quiet. Some taste like smoke, salt, and soul. She stood, wiped her hands on her jeans, and walked back toward the car. The fog didn't lift behind her. But in front of her, it parted. In the heart of the city, a new plaque was unveiled. It didn't honor generals, mayors, or celebrities. It marked the founding of the Revival Culinary Institute. Below her name it read, "Where recipes become revolution." The crowd applauded as Lila stepped back, her expression humble but fierce. Students flanked her, aprons smudged with stories. One of them whispered, "You really did it." Lila shook her head, smiling. "We did it." This wasn't just a school. It was a home for the forgotten flavors, erased voices, and bold beginnings. Inside, the first lesson wasn't knife skills. It was history. Before fire, before plating, they'd sit in a circle and tell where their flavors came from. Because Lila had learned, the strongest seasoning in the world was memory. At a bookstore uptown, people gathered for a reading. The cover of the new release glowed under soft lighting. Salt, Smoke, and Soul by Lila Baptiste. Not a cookbook, a memoir. Inside were pages soaked in stories. Recipes, yes, but also letters, poems, losses, and maps of resilience. Lila stood behind a small podium, reading a passage about her grandmother's hands. One listener wept quietly. Another closed their eyes, nodding. Afterward, readers lined up, not just for signatures but for connection. A woman said, "You made me want to cook again. For my mother, who passed before I learned her dishes." Lila took her hand and said, "It's not too late, the food remembers." And in that single line, 1,000 recipes came back to life. Meanwhile, in homes across the country, her recipes lived on. A father in Chicago made her cornbread with his son, saying, "This is how your grandma did it." A girl in Oakland made gumbo from the revival site, texting her aunt in New Orleans for tips. A college student in Detroit recreated her sweet heat okra for a dorm potluck. It was happening, quietly, powerfully. Not in five-star restaurants, but in kitchens with cracked tile and chipped mugs. Lila's food had become theirs. And, in that spreading, it multiplied. In every stovelit story, her legacy moved from singular to shared. No longer just her voice, but a chorus. One day, a reporter asked Lila what the secret ingredient was, the one thing that turned her food into folklore. She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Time," she said. "Time to listen, time to unlearn, time to taste the silence between generations." The article went viral. But Lila stayed offline that weekend, tending to her herb garden behind the restaurant. She wasn't chasing applause anymore. She was tending to the soil. A student called her from the kitchen. "Chef, do you have a minute?" She wiped her hands and said, "Always." That was her power. Not perfection, not dominance, but presence. To show up, to hold space, to feed without fear. That's what the greats had done for her. And now, it was her turn to return the table. In the very last scene, the frame tightens on a single spoon resting on a wood counter. Aged, worn, loved. Lila places it beside a steaming bowl of gumbo and walks away, her apron hanging on the wall. The camera lingers. No music, just the sound of bubbling broth. Then off-screen, we hear a new voice, a young girl, maybe 10, asking, "Can I try making it next time?" A soft reply, "It's all yours." Fade to black. No logos. No credits. Just one final line on screen. What they tried to erase became a recipe the world will never forget. Lila's story isn't just one of survival. It's a revolution simmered in silence, seasoned with struggle and served with love, over and over again.